To frame or not to frame? Is that really a question? When you finish a painting, of course you're going to frame it, right? Well, not necessarily. Do you really need a frame to make a sale? Does framing matter? Hi, my name is Jeff. I've been painting in oils and watercolors for 35 years, and welcome to my studio. In 2007, Gene Weingarten of the Washington Post won a Pulitzer Prize for asking that very question: does framing matter? He decided to do an experiment. He put a world famous violinist in the Washington Metro on a cold January morning to see if anybody would notice. There was no advanced publicity, there was nothing. Now, the musician was Joshua Bell, and he's like the Yo-Yo Ma of the violin. 2 weeks prior, he had played in the Library of Congress in DC, and then the week prior, he had played in Boston. So here he was in the Metro, wearing a long sleeve T-shirt, a ball cap, and jeans. And he puts his violin case on the floor in front of him, throws some bills in there and some coins in there to seat it, and he starts playing. Basically, the most famous violin player in the world was busking for money. The idea, the experiment, the question was this: would people notice the quality of the playing without the framing of a concert hall? And the answer was no. A few people did notice. One commuter paused for a few minutes to lean against the wall to listen. A child was tugging on his mother's hand, trying to get her to pause so that he could listen. There was a gentleman who had trained as a classical violinist earlier in his youth, and he recognized that the quality of the playing was beyond professional. It was actually artistry. But other than that, no. Nobody really noticed. And there were hundreds, perhaps thousands of people that passed him by, and he played for almost 45 minutes. There was one person who did stop towards the end, and she was considered an outlier by the Post and the journalists because she recognized him from playing at the Library of Congress 2 weeks ago. She had been there, and she was puzzled. Why was Joshua Bell busking in the Metro? And what did he make busking in the Metro? He made $32.17. Yeah. Now, the young woman who recognized him put in the most amount. She put in $20, but they didn't count that because she did recognize him. So $32.17. And the Stradivarius violin that he was playing, yes, it was a Stradivarius violin, was valued at the time at $3.5 million. In the same article, he interviewed a curator at the National Gallery in DC. And the curator thought he might have known what happened. So he posited that he could take an abstract painting, like say an Ellsworth Kelly, march it through the museum, down the steps, across the street, and hang it in a cafe. And this cafe at the time was Corcoran students would hang their paintings there when there was a Corcoran School of Art. And that's another story, a sad one. But so he could hang it on the wall for $150, and this painting is valued at $5 million. And he's saying that nobody's really going to notice it. Somebody may say, "Oh, that looks like an Ellsworth Kelly. Please pass the salt." Now, Bell was playing classical music, and the Ellsworth Kelly is abstract art. So what if the musician were like Dua Lipa or Miley or, oh my God, Taylor? Would they draw a crowd? Probably. Yeah. Or maybe not, because Avril Lavigne posed with her band as a street group in the subways of New York City, and they were making a music video, but they went through the whole thing, and it was like all undercover, and they made $13. This is one of my favorite stories about context. So Long Branch, New Jersey, late at night, it's raining, really late at night, like after midnight. And a suspicious character was called in because he was walking around peering into windows. And the description was that he was wearing sweatpants and a hoodie. So a young officer who was on duty that night, her name is Bubble, finds the guy, and she starts asking him some questions. She asked him for ID, and he said he didn't have any. And she's like, okay, so what's your name and what are you doing? And he said, well, my name is Bob Dylan and I'm looking for Springsteen's house. Yeah, that didn't go down well with her. So she continued asking him questions. She said, well, where do you live, Bob? And Bob said, well, I've got lots of houses. I've got a house in California. I've got a house in London. Um, and I play music and I sing songs. She's like, okay. Then where are you staying, Bob? A hotel down by the ocean. Now, if you've been in Long Branch, New Jersey, you know that there's a whole string of hotels alongside the ocean. So they finally find the correct hotel. They pull up, and the band manager comes running out and says, where have you been? And yes, she had Bob Dylan in the back of her police cruiser. Now let's talk paintings. A friend of mine was an instructor at RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. She taught scientific illustration. And her and her husband every year would go to the student art sale. And they had some real finds. And she was telling me about it. And I said, well, can I come over and take a look at them? Because they had quite a collection. And she's like, sure. So we arranged an afternoon and I come over and it was some really nice stuff. And as I'm walking around, we're going from room to room and I'm like, oh, I love the way that brushwork on that painting, or I love the way that they captured the light, or, oh, I see the problem that they were dealing with and I love the way that they solved it. So we get to the living room and above the fireplace is a large pastel. Span the width of the fireplace. It's like 36 by 30, around there. And I walk up to it and I get all expansive and I'm like, well, obviously this student was going through their Wolf Kahn phase. And there's silence behind me. And I turn around and I look at her. And then I turn around and I look at the signature in the lower right, and it was Wolf Kahn. Okay, one last story and then I'll bring it home. A number of years ago, I was in an antique store in Georgetown, in DC, and this was a very high-end antique store. Everything in there was pretty darn expensive, but you wouldn't know it walking in. It wasn't carefully curated. Everything that wasn't nailed down was for sale. So you had all the tables, the things on the tables, everything, and it was all cluttered together. There was no organization to it. And it looked like something out of rural Pennsylvania or New York, except it was expensive. And I found this little pencil drawing behind a bunch of other stuff. It was almost hidden. And I picked it up and I said to the person that I was with, I said, gosh, this looks like Modigliani. And I pick it up and it's in an old frame that's fallen apart. And there's some French gallery stickers on the back that are fading. And it was signed Modigliani. And yes, the price tag was wow. And so we're going through, there was like 4 stories to this place. And one floor was all like oceanic tourist art, African tourist art. We're walking up the stairs and in the stairwell was a large nude, and that was signed and labeled as James Montgomery Flagg. There were different rooms with paintings, and I walked into the one room with paintings, and there were paintings everywhere. They were stacked all in lines with no dividers, no protection, nothing. Some were stacked against the wall, some were hanging on the walls, and there were some really brightly colored paintings against the wall that caught my eye, and I walked over there, and it looked like a study for a portrait of JFK. And it was signed Elaine de Kooning, and there were like 3 or 4 of them. Yeah, wow, just wow. Last fall, 2 of my paintings were in a museum show, and I could have framed them, but I didn't. They were gallery wrapped canvas, so what I did was I screwed a couple D-rings in the back, and then I dropped them off. One painting sold, and the other one didn't. And there weren't any frames. So does framing, was the context that matters more than framing? So let's look at the stories that I just told. We've got Joshua Bell. He's definitely taken out of context. We got Bob Dylan, who was actually touring with John Mellencamp and Willie Nelson at the time, and he's not in his context. We've got Wolf Kahn, Uh, I was looking at student art. I wasn't expecting that. Ellsworth Kelly, you don't expect to see in a for sale in a cafe. And Modigliani, I was definitely not expecting to see a Modigliani. I've only seen Modigliani in museums. So all of those are taken out of context. Maybe it's the context that matters and not the framing. But you know what? They're all quality. So if you move them around, the quality still comes through. I don't frame my paintings, but that's actually a business decision. So a gallery takes half of whatever the painting's being sold for. So if anything that you have to automatically double it. So let's say the cost of the frame is $100. The cost of the framing is $50. It's $150. Double that, it's $300. But what about my time? I have to drop the painting off and I have to pick it up. Let's say that's $50. So now we've got another $100. So there's $400 tacked onto the price of the painting before I even set the price of the painting. And those are really low prices. Good luck getting a really nice frame for $100 or a framer that's going to frame for $50. And my time is kind of worth a little bit more than $50. So it's just another point about framing is that you're stuck on an aspect ratio. So let's say you buy 8 by 10s, 11 by 14s, 16 by 20s. All of those frames, the ready-made frames, come in those, come like that. Or you may want to break out and say do a square or something like that, or a different aspect ratio. Then you're talking about custom framing, and custom framing can get expensive. I don't know, it's 3 times more. It's a lot. And then if you're selling your art online, you have to worry about shipping. So shipping a frame, you're adding to the dimensions, you're adding to the weight. And if it's glazed, if it has glass on it, that's a whole other story. So it's just easier. It's just easier to sell paintings without frames, especially online. To frame or not to frame? I mean, if I have a work in my house, it's usually framed. And I can't think of any that aren't framed. Well, with framing too, you also run the risk of this happened to me. It's a nice painting and it has a nice frame on it, and you take it into the gallery and somebody says, "Oh, I love the frame." Or as an 11-year-old would say, bombastic side eye. I think context matters more than framing, but framing can also create context. Let's say you take a child's drawing and you put a frame around it. You're saying that this is special to me. The same thing for a family photograph or something like that. So yes, they go back and forth. With the painting that that was in the museum show of mine that sold, would it have sold if it wasn't in the museum? Maybe, maybe not. Being in a museum actually helped. But you know what? It's funny because a couple weeks later, I ran into the collector and her husband, and she said they just picked up the painting that they bought with a frame that they picked out themselves. Thanks for stopping by. Remember, if you support the arts, then buy originals.